Welcome to this Swishu's Forum podcast on the Hivemind. I'm joined by Lilia Kozlowska, Pramod Prasanth, Fiona Revell, Nadia Stoykov and Armin Scharlach. Swishu's forums are open. Anyone may join. There are no formal presentations. There's no agenda. Hivemind is about decision making. Who makes decisions and who sets direction? Is it leaders or influencers or the crowd? We join as Lily tackles some of these questions.
So I will be totally honest, but I think this is what forum is for. I didn't know what is this. I usually participate in the events organized by Bill, but I didn't know what is that, so I researched a bit. And Bill, you mentioned the concept of influencers in organization, but if we compare this trend to the Hivemind as it is, I think it's not possible to achieve it in real life because usually the bees, for instance, they do not have any bosses and influencers or leaders. They are just acting. I think they are successful with this concept of hive mind because also they do not have underlying expectations like recognition, feeling of being appreciated, desire to have some authority, which people do. So I agree that in principle organizations move towards hive mind concept with all this teamwork, team decision making, but I do not think that it's 100% achievable because we are people, we have our feelings. So group decision making with influencers, it's not exactly the hive mind, although it's closer versus like authoritative decision making.
Fiona?
Yeah. So my provocative start was decision makers aren't overrated, but the mythology around them is. So we love the theatre, the decision, the moment when something's announced in the boardroom, the signatures and all that. In reality, I think in my experience, most executive decisions are simply the final stage in a process that the organization has already completed. So by the time something comes to C-suite, the organization's decided. And when the hive mind comes, how I liken the hive mind, it's kind of similar to what's been said. The hive mind is where, in my experience, the decisions normally really form. The organizations I've experienced are less like command and control machines and more like distributed sensing networks. So the people across the functions, procurement, engineering, operations, finance, we're constantly adjusting, responding, innovating. And we're shaping the direction long before the executive signs off. And going then to the influencing aspect, so the internal influencing, this is something that I've become more experienced in my journey. I see more and more that's the hidden power broker. So most organizations have people, if not every organization, have people who are quietly shaping what gets approved. They're not always senior, they're not always loud, but they're the ones who are getting the collective intelligence. They in our case, spot supplier trends early. An analyst who drafts a first version of a business case, the engineer who frames the problem that makes the answer obvious. The internal influencers, in my opinion, are the real power, even when they don't realize it. Why do our executives still matter? Yes, they do, but differently. They're not irrelevant, far from it. They're playing a critical role because they're setting the context, defining the constraints, allocating the resources, and ensuring accountability. But they're not the originator.
Got some interesting stuff going on here. The influencers, the role of the actual decision makers, the bosses. You didn't use the word, but whether there isn't something of theatre in that formal sign-off process. And just one thing in response to Lily, I did check because I was looking up Hivemind. I'm really, really pleased that people are researching these topics before coming on. I'm really impressed. Bees, when they come back to the hive, and because they found a new nesting site or a source of nectar, and they do their waggle dance, did you know that 25 to 30% of the bees that are exposed to the waggle dance ignore it? They think it is so that not all of the hive goes off in one direction. that there is some diversity of thinking within the hive, and you maintain other options in case that source gets used up. I find that fascinating. So we'll go to Pramod then, Armin.
So, two things. One, on the Hivemind, on the bees topic. So I did some research long back on bees. One of my cousins actually created a documentary about bees, so it was interesting at that time. What I found was that there is actually a bit of a design in there. So it's not like random that, people making decision. So there are two things that happens. One is, I think the most interesting thing is the age. So the age of the bees actually defines what they do. The older bees basically would do less foraging, more nursing, and so on. And the younger one actually go and do the foraging of finding. But the interesting bit, of course, is what happens if this is disturbed, so they're killed, and then there is this pheromone-based recalibration that happens. That's the most interesting bit. There is a little bit of a hierarchy that's happening in term, based on the age of the bee. So it's not like without any system in place. Now, how this came to be, I don't know, but there is some kind of system in place. Now, the interesting thing about in general, right, like the examples you shared, Bill, I think the problem is we need to differentiate two things with decision making. One is like the diagnosis, the creation of what decisions are to be made, and the decision making itself, like deciding. So, and they need to be separated out, because the diagnosis itself is, it can be automated. You can use AI, ML. It is kind of distributed within the organization very often, and this is the part where influencers play a role. We were in procurement long back. There, we were playing the role of influencers. We never had the budget on our own. We did not. We are not the budget holders. We are not the decision makers, but we were influencing the decision. But it's only the diagnosis part. Ultimately, the binding decision maker is the person who basically holds. They are more like liability anchors. We discussed this in one of the previous sessions, right? Like decision makers hold the liability of making the decision, so they need to be compensated. They need to have some kind of deterrence for making bad decisions. There is a legal aspect to it, and accountability. We discussed this again in one of the last sessions, right? So for me, there are two different things: the diagnosis with respect to decision making, that influences and a lot of people, invisible people, actually contribute. And very often in organizations, I find that very difficult sometimes to navigate the bigger the organization gets, because these invisible influencers, if you're trying to sell to an organization, they are hidden all over the place, and they can say something in a session or a meeting, and then the whole thing goes in a completely different way. But they don't actually make the decisions. The binding decisions are made by CEO, CFO, or very often very few people in organizations make those decisions. The interesting thing is also things like SOX, for example. When SOX came in early 2000.
Sarbanes-Oxley, for the benefit of anyone who's not familiar with it.
So I think Section 302 or something like that basically mandated that CEO, CFO, named people sign documents saying that, oh, we have read through all the documents. And that kind of increased, for example, the compensation of CEOs. So for me, yes, the decision making, this hive thing, the diagnosis part can happen, in interesting ways, but the binding decision making has to be concentrated.
Thank you, Pramod. Armin.
I think, Pramod, you raised a couple of points that link very well with my thinking about it. Let me start one level earlier. And I know it's an old take of all of us consultants that we always try to segment the problem first before we are trying to think about a solution. And here I would segment in organizations between the traditional operational, tactical, and strategic decision making. We see very different behaviors in organizations and the application of Hivemind in these different areas. I think in the tactical and the very operational one, it is an advantage if you don't necessarily need always to have a superior making a decision, but you encourage people to make decisions on their own and just go on and get this efficiently and effectively running. Whereas for the strategic ones, I'm not sure whether bees are really strategic. Therefore, I think the way how they are operating is not a really good model for strategic decision making in organizations. Now, the reason why in strategic decisions we typically see a delegation of this decision making to superiors is, in my opinion, out of.
When you say delegation, you're talking about delegation upwards.
Yeah, exactly.
To superiors.
Yeah. Is for two main reasons. One reason is, as you mentioned, Pramod, someone holds the budget, and if that's not you, you need to get the approval from someone who has the budget. The other reason, which I think is even more often the case, is this traditional cover my ... risk avoidance, where people who could actually do a strategic decision themselves are hesitant to do it because if it would fail, someone would blame them. And then it's always easier if it was a joint decision, if someone else on the higher ups has made the ultimate decision, even if it was your suggestion to do that, there's always someone else to blame. And this is why organizations have a tendency to get more people than actually would be necessary making a decision in order to cover each one from failures.
Actually, I'm looking into all of this from more of a group thing perspective, not in such a positive thing, but rather the crowd tends to, make decision to the lowest denominator. Exactly what Armin said, not take responsibility, but spread responsibility across the crowd or the beehive, and at the same time dilute the strong decisions and even not execute the decisions. Because what we've seen is really dramatic, that you make a decision, the decision is good, it's probably made by, let's say the executive office, and then the decision disappears. Then the decision is not executed or pretends to be executed, but is not executed. Why? Because the collective consciousness of the group is not supporting the decision. The collective consciousness of the group thinks that this is a stupid decision. They are not going to say this out loud, but they're just going to sabotage it silently. For me, this is a very dangerous event in every organization. And that's why when you make decisions, you need to consider, is that decision going to sink in and be accepted by the beehive? That was another aspect that we haven't discussed here. And for me, this is really the danger that we should watch for.
That's fascinating. There is a process of looking at decisions from a hive mind point of view, which is that a collective view can build up in the group. And that collective view crystallizes into a feeling that something should be done and this is something, let's do it.
Yeah.
And then that goes through to a formal decision-making point. And then, because the decision cannot cover all the degrees of freedom in the actual enabling to make it happen, that goes out into the organization. And then exactly as you're saying, Nadia, you're then relying on the organization to make it happen. So it goes from, this seems like something we ought to do, narrows down to a formal decision point. Then you're back into the organization, widening it out. And if an executive lands in here without having the first bit, the second bit is likely to go wrong.
Yep.
Because the organization hasn't been prepared for it. So that's a theory that's around.
Exactly. And actually what is fascinating with the bees is that the way they communicate with each other their tasks and accept their tasks and their piece of responsibility is fascinating. And that's something that you could not easily do with humans, unfortunately.
Well, Armin?
Yes and no. And this is what I wanted to comment already on what you were saying, Bill. I think we all have seen in various group situations that there are some people who have a natural talent to be leader, where the group is more willing to accept what they are saying than it would be with the others. It's hard to train that. And this is why I think so many people in management positions are not really good managers. But these people do exist. Very often with a military background. I don't know why that is the case, but a lot of the people that I met who have that natural talents to really make people following them instinctively very often had an education as an officer in the army.
Well, they're just more assertive than the others, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Leaders versus influencers. Can we talk about that, please? Because I think Armin's talking about leaders, somebody who stands up and says, follow me. Whereas a lot of influencers are, as Lily said, and Fiona, I think, hidden. In fact, I would go further. I say some influencers don't know that they are influencers. Can we talk about leaders and influencers? Maybe you'd like to start, Armin. You were talking about leaders, I think.
I was coming from the decision-making perspective. Mm-hmm. If you are having a great idea what the organization should do, it won't happen until you have that leadership gene in you, that talent to make people follow your idea, or you are involving someone who is having the authority to do so.
I worked very closely with someone who was very bright. He was not a leader, never would be, never could be, but he was a hell of an influencer. What he wanted to happen generally happened. He shared this thinking with me once in an example. We were proposing an investment to the board. The sensible investment was quite expensive, but it was the one that was much more secure, and any sensible person would have chosen it. There was one that was half the price, and it was a cut and carve type of solution, and it was very high risk. And Peter, because that was his name, said, when the board sees this, they're just going to say, show me the best value, and that's going to be the cheaper one. So we've got to present this to make sure that the best option is the cheaper one. He took me through it, and we made sure that what appeared to be the cheapest in terms of capital cost actually looked the most expensive by the time you'd added on all the bits and pieces. And sure enough, the board got it, and it saw the total cost rather than the actual capital cost. Nobody asked the key questions, and a sensible decision came out. Peter was displaying his influencing skills there, and he came to the right decision, and the board hadn't seen what was going on in the background.
Isn't it fair then to say that in order to get something done, you either have to be the leader yourself or that leadership talent, or an influencer? Because if you're neither nor, if you're just a working bee in the beehive, you can have the best idea that you want, probably won't happen.
Well, but there is a huge difference between a leader and an influencer, because the leader takes responsibility and the influencer convinces everybody else that this is the right decision.
That's the easier job, so to say. You're right.
and here is really the key, because, as we said, I can make a decision in my ivory office and then nobody buys in. And if nobody buys in, this decision will die at the end of the day. It will not be executed. But if I have a couple of influencers that are behind me and believe in the decision and are going to convince the rest of the organization just because they're influencers that this is the right decision, the chances of the decision becoming reality is very high. And that's why both have different qualities and both need to be working together, but with a very clear tasks, really, because a decision needs to be explained to be executed. Yeah?
Can you be a leader without being an influencer?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can be an influencer without being a leader.
A lot of leaders are also influencers. They don't necessarily have to, and not every leader is an influencer, but many are. And then it is much more helpful, because then you don't need a second person to get your things done.
You need a second person, because otherwise it becomes very dictatorial, okay? You need more people to support what you're doing and to influence it.
Pramod was trying to come in, but before you do, you're talking about the second influencer. Did anybody watch the video that I put out with this? The first follower? No. Okay, there's a video. You can go back and have a look at it, or you might have seen it in the past.
I did watch it.
You
did. Quite hilarious. I'd seen it before.
Yeah.
The one with the TED Talk.
Do you want to describe it, Fiona?
So it looks like a concert going on. Everybody's on a hillside. One guy stands up and starts dancing in an interesting way. And it's just him on his own, making an exhibition of himself. And then after a fashion, one person joins him. And what was important in the leadership aspect was that the second person came up and was also mimicking the same guy with the dancing. the first guy acknowledged him, and that was a key leadership. So the first guy's the leader, the second guy's an influencer, as I recall. And so the leader acknowledges the influencer, and that was absolutely golden. That has to happen. If he disregards, then nothing else happens. The second guy, the influencer, then draws a couple more people, a couple of more weak people. After moments, the whole hillside is full of people, and only the people who don't want to be included are sitting down, and that's the minority. So it took the guts for the leader and then him to acknowledge the influencer to then grow the group, as it were. That's kind of how I understood it, Bill.
And the influencer in this case was called, in this particular TED talk, the first follower. The power of the first follower was validating the leader, because without that first follower, the leader was not regarded as valid.
Yeah, exactly the role of the influencer, as we talked.
Yeah. Pramod, please.
This example, right, the first follower thing. So, for example, I'm building a tool, a decision intelligence platform, in fact. So the challenge very often is like the first customer, right? Like in equivalent to a first follower, somebody who, like validates you, says that, oh, okay, this is interesting. That first one is always a challenge. Once you have that, then it becomes a lot easier afterwards to go and, convince anyone else. So that first one becomes very difficult and very important. But my question, what I wanted to ask earlier was, I think all of us agree that there are leaders and influencers. And the point I was making at the beginning, right? Diagnosis and the binding decision-making are two different things. So the leaders essentially put the signature to a decision and they get compensated for it, either with power or money or whatever else. But what I'm curious is like, what drives influencers in influencing? Because they are influencing, they have special skills. Some people have, like the example you mentioned about Peter. There is a skill there, but what influences them? What is the motivation for them to be doing this? Because if you think about it, money is not really the factor, because money goes to the person who actually puts a signature. A lot of these influencers don't get, not the social media influencers in organizations. They don't get paid big salaries or anything like that. So I'm curious, what is it? Is it like an intrinsic motivation for them to just
Are you sure that they're not paid the big salaries? The fact that you don't know, because there are, in every organization, there are a couple of influencers that maybe appear to be on a, medium level, but maybe they get other perks that you just don't know about because the leader realizes that they're the influencers and they need them.
Yeah,
in these difficult moments.
Lily was going to come in on that one.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that, sometimes maybe the motivation is money, but based on what I have seen and experience and the ideas I tried to promote in different companies, I think it's about personal and professional beliefs, what you think is appropriate, valuable. Because in my case, and I saw many people like this, I was promoting a lot of valuable ideas and I didn't get like salary increase for this or higher bonus. It's just you see the direction and you want like to explain people the advantages of the certain solution. But I do agree that sometimes people are motivated by money or some other incentives, but I have seen and I have experienced that it's because of the personal beliefs. And also, I think like a bit earlier, somebody of you mentioned about executors, like alternative to the bees. And I think it's also there is nothing wrong about this. There are like people who are interested to be executors all their life and they are fond of their jobs. So they're kind of working and very hard working bees and they are okay with this. So there is nothing wrong to be the executor. Although recently there is a trend like on all events, not only related to procurement, supply chain, people are repeating that they do not need executors anymore. They need people with leadership. And actually now when we started discussing this, I think what they actually need are influencers because they want people, they call it leadership skills, but in fact they want people influencers who will be initiative, proactive, and so on. So they want these people. But being a leader means that based on like company policies, some governance, you are authorized to make the decisions. But I do not believe that like in nowadays corporate world, based on policies, manager has a lot of power to approve like strategic decisions. You still need to hear yes from your boss. So I think this our discussions helped me to understand that actually a lot of like high level people from, I don't know, sales, procurement, supply chain, quality, they say that they want people with leadership rather than executors, but in fact they all want influencers.
Can I ask, when you say that recently people have said they want leaders
Yeah.
primarily, and then just people to do what they want, executors or executors,
Yeah.
and that they're not looking for influencers, they just want to crystallize into leaders. Does this come from the AI world, the movement of AI, and what they're doing is calling executors agents? So is that coming from the idea that you can have a very small number of leaders and then they can operate through AI agents? Maybe I've got the wrong track there.
Partially, yes, but mostly they just want to reduce the layers to save money.
Right.
And in such a way, you just need people who are not afraid of being proactive, because now it's the trend that everybody should be agile, resilient. So I think partially related to AI, yes, because AI took the job of executors mostly. I mean,
Right.
I can compare with procurement supply chain. I think the first thing it took is the job of back office, not strategic.
So Lily, is there perhaps a fear of influencers in that they create distraction, diversity, they pull people in different directions? Because if you've got a number of different influencers competing for influence, competing to have an effect, that would create cognitive diversity within the organization, which could be a very, very good thing. Could be the reason an organization survives, but in the short term, it's hard to manage.
Yes, I think they are partially afraid of using this word, not to need like demotivate people who do not have the goal to be these influencers. And I think honestly, the word influencers is associated with Instagram, YouTube, social medias. So that's why it's not like heavily used in business words. So that's why they're using leaders. But I mean, what they mean basically influencers, because otherwise if they want the leader, they assign like the responsibility in the policies to each manager and they allow to make more strategic decisions, but it's not usually the case. In fact, they want influencers, which is transitional step between execution and leader, if this is the development person wants.
Actually, influencer is becoming a dirty word because of the social media. Otherwise, it existed before and it was well used before, but now it becomes cheap just because the people influencing on social media are not exactly your image of a leader, I guess.
I think that's a good point to make, Nadia, in case anyone ever listens to this as a podcast. We ought to make it quite clear that we are talking about internal influencers who are trying to do things for most of the right reasons. And we're not talking about media,
Kim Kardashian or
social
something.
media influencers. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any follow-up to that?
I'm still not clear for me, like what motivates. I mean, intrinsic motivation is there, but how do we get them going? I mean, how do we identify them? I mean, I think that's relatively easy. I mean, after they start doing things, influencing. But if I'm setting up an organization, if I want to hire, I think that's what Lily, I think you were mentioning, that like companies are looking for influencers now. How do I identify them to hire them? What kind of qualities are we looking for? I'm a bit lost still in my head.
Yeah, but you're not going to hire influencers. You have to identify within your organization who are the influential people. You're not going to go and put a job description, I want an influencer. No, because you don't know what is the population that you need to influence. That's why this is very internal beehive type of thing. Okay. In every organization, people know who is listened to, who is the person that whenever they say something or they enter the room, people are listening, or who is the person they go to. It's not the boss normally, it's somebody else who is considered a big expert in something, or person with a very outspoken, manner. These are the real influencers. They have jobs, they have other jobs, they do other things. Influencing is something that they do on the side, and they're motivated because they know about what influence they have over the organization, and this is a very pleasing thing, apart from the benefits.
Yeah, I don't want to allow Pramod's point to be lost. You say we don't recruit influencers deliberately. And I want to push back a little bit on that, because in the time when I used to do a lot of bulk interviewing, one of the key things was to go through the CV, the application form, identify the things that this person had done, had changed, been associated with, improved, and then to find out what their role in it was. Had they just been going along with the team? Had they been taking notes for a team that was doing things? Or had they been actually generating ideas for the team and challenging those ideas and getting the team to challenge them and evolve them? That was a large part of the interviewing process. We were actively looking for people that had made things happen, not necessarily being up front and leading it, but making things happen, influencing.
I think it's a combination. So it's kind of a bit of what Nadia and Lily married together. It's the person who enters the room, who has the knowledge, who has the gravitas, if you like, you could say, the personality, but always not necessarily the loudest. It could be the quiet person, the person that people go to as the expert, as the knowledge, as the moral or ethical voice in somebody's head, if you like, or the conscience. Whereas with Lily, I think I resonated more with it's the intrinsic value of the person, the personal values. So what differentiates, to your extent, Bill, and drawing your bit about drawing people into an organization, is people who have that je ne sais quoi, that difference, that critical thinking. Somebody who's prepared to come in and not just be an AI bot and follow, I do 1, 2, 3, I do 1, 2, 3, but ask why. And then through their expertise, influence, and reach within the organization, because just in this internal organization and us in the hub procurement and supply chain, that is our nature to an extent. The successful ones, that's our nature, to be influencers, to look for the patterns, to see what's coming, predict and advise, and pass it on to, if we're not the decision maker, the C-suite for the decision. So the generation of the idea is within the hive. The leader and the decision maker is the signature, if you like, but it's successful because the idea came from the hive.
You're suggesting, in answer to Pramod, that there is some intrinsic sense of well-being that comes from being an influencer and doing the right thing by the organization, by society, by whatever you're in, that would reward that person, to answer Pramod's question about what motivates influencers.
The culture of the organization would have a huge impact on these people coming to surface and how they behave. And the kind of influences, in organization A might be very different from the kind of influencer in organization B. Because based on the culture, it could be the intrinsic motivation that surfaces, or in some other organization, it could be the monetary. And I see this as a cultural thing, because in some cultures where, let's say, non-ethical behavior is accepted, so you can be an influencer because, especially for some of us who've been in procurement, right? You've seen examples where, you get taken for a luxury ride, and then that becomes your motivation for influencing internally.
Coming back to Pramod's question, because the initial question was like, how do you identify them during recruitment process? I think it's quite difficult to do this based on the CV, especially now with AI. But during interview, it's highly possible. There are a lot of situational, behavioral questions, and they are quite unpredictable. I think that there are the candidates who are ready to make that up to fit, but I still believe that this is small percentage. So based on these responses and the person's tone, there are some green flags which will identify that either this person is an influencer or a potential influencer who you can develop. I would say the general green flags would be that this person is curious, open-minded. You can also ask about the new, like some project this person was leading in the previous companies, like new ideas this person brought. I mean, you cannot make this up unless this person has some actor's talent. It's the person needs to be honest, I think. So I believe that there are some green flags and energy match that you know when you know.
Armin.
The model that I have been using for many years, both in the hiring process as well as when I had career discussions with young consultants, was that I told them the difference between a senior consultant and a manager is once you have understood that you can only do so and so much yourself, there comes the point where you need to start multiplying yourself, where you need to get others helping you to accomplish what you want to accomplish. This is not necessarily, and actually not really often, just because I'm giving you a team, the traditional education of a manager, I'm giving you people and then make something out of it. But what I'm looking at, whether that is on a project, or even better, when it's not a project, when there is not a particular pressure from the client or so, when they do an internal project that no one is really pushing them, but they still are really intrinsically motivated to get something done, and not just with their own work, spending long nights at the computer, but getting other people to help them. This is for me the best evidence that someone has really understood what the difference is between a consultant and a manager.
Well, but here, consultant manager, it's a different story. When we talk about influencers, I think that it's a different aura that the influencers have. It's really the experience. It is really the approach to people, the way they engage people, and the way people respond to them. Because, I've seen in organizations people who are brilliant, but nobody could stand them. The real experts, right? But sincerely, but nobody could stand them. There is some personal dislike that the organization have towards this person. Otherwise, the person is brilliant. You give them project, they will do super expert work. At the same time, an influencer is somebody that everybody likes. Even if they're not the greatest expert, they can bring authentically to the others ideas, decisions, or things that others will start thinking about. They will pay attention. The point is who pays attention. Okay, if the organization pays attention, then this is valuable. Then you are an influencer. It's very hard to define, of course. There is no golden rule about it, but these for me are the real qualities. And this is very hard to find on an interviewing process of 1 hour, 2 hours, where everybody's putting a mask and trying to behave, although you find out if they're authentic or not, but you still don't know how the organization will react to this person.
Yeah, I actually agree with Nadia, and I've realized that there is this popular not like training assessment in the corporate world about 4 colors. I think everybody made
About
it.
what? Sorry, I missed that.
4 colors.
4 colors. Oh,
inside. Yes. So I think a lot of influencers would have a yellow one. Maybe not on the first place, but it should be at least on the second. So
And yellow is
for
what?
me,
I forgot.
Yeah, yellow is like the sunshine energy when you are in communicating with people, when you come into the room and there is more light.
Yellow is really the communicator.
Yes.
Blue is the analyzer, red is the leader, and green is the
Collaboration.
peacemaker, collaborator, yes, something like that. But this is the cheerleader. The yellow is the cheerleader.
Yeah.
It's really the influencer, communicator, influencer.
Let me just challenge. Don't like the word challenge, but let me ask:
Oh, challenge.
Is it the cheerleader? Aren't there influencers who are, they used to call them grey men or men in grey suits, who would influence political parties? They weren't cheerleaders very often. They did things in the back rooms on a one-to-one conversation rather than standing up and cheerleading.
You mean men with checkered shirts?
Checkered shirts, is it? I don't know.
lobbyists,
The
a key
power behind
attribute
the
that
throne.
possibly, but and I think that comes back to the hidden power brokers statement from earlier. I think there's a couple of things on the attributes. It's somebody that's trusted. So they could be the quiet, they could be the loud, they could be the cheerleader, what have you, but they're trusted. But the other thing from a business perspective that I think makes businesses successful using internal influences is diversity. So the one area that I know we only have 5 minutes, I was just going to pop it in as a thing, the neurodiverse colleagues. So strengthening the hive mind through diversity. So often we overlook the neurodiverse, not because of the label, but because it's just not something that comes up. Let's say, why are they important? Not because we use the word neurodiverse, but because they have different cognitive style. So they would often excel in the pattern recognition, the deep analysis, alternate framing, and the challenging of groupthink, like you said you wanted to challenge. And I think they become the quiet influencers. So the people leaders keep going back to them because they see what others miss. So they make the hive smarter, they make it more resilient, less prone to the blind spots, you could say. And I think bringing the trust of the influencer along with the diversity, using the neurodiverse and the different aspects, it brings a more collective and resilient hive, an informed hive, that then informs the decision makers. They're not overrated, but they're not creating the decision makers, in my opinion, are not creating the ideas. The hive is creating the idea, and that they're the engine. They're the distributed, often invisible intelligence, shapes the direction long before the leader acts. So the executives aren't creating the decisions, they're ratifying, resourcing, formalizing, but the organization, through its influencers and its neurodiverse thinkers, are making the everyday adjustments. And they're already doing you could say, the deciding. And so I think we should spend less time about celebrating the moment of the decision and more about strengthening the hive, i.e. the collective intelligence that makes the decisions possible.
Being a good influencer is not necessarily automatically a positive thing. If the hive is totally streamlined and is listening to a stupid influencer, it can go very wrong. And therefore, your idea of bringing in diversity is indeed a very good measure of not only additional creativity, but also risk prevention getting steered in the wrong direction.
What Fiona was saying about diversity, cognitive, neurodiverse people thinking and influencing fit extraordinarily well together. But I don't know why. And I would love to see that developed in terms of the cognitive diversity within an organization. The fact that if you combine that with people who have good communicating skills and can provoke certain ideas and thoughts within an organization, which results in a reaction from other parts of the organization and maybe gets further diversity or encourages other influencers. I'm sorry, I've just seen the connection that Fiona was making there, and I'm excited by it, and I don't know how to take it forward. Somebody help me.
Well,
a new podcast.
New podcast, definitely, because this is a big topic about neurodiversity and as well diversity in general. And I would say diversity of thought, because, we've seen many organizations where there is a physical diversity, men, women, and the sort, but there is a group thing. And that's why I think that diversity of thought is very important to stress upon. It's not about just filling the numbers, how many women, how many men, black, orange, whatever, but you have to have real challengers and out of the box thinkers that, maybe you don't listen to, but they will throw a little nugget of gold. And if others start, discussing and brainstorming around it, something great could come out of the hive.
So if we were to have a forum on cognitive diversity, which I think is diversity of thinking, and we made it clear that this is not about giving everybody equal opportunities and acknowledging that some people, it's about the benefit to the group of being cognitively diverse and of dealing with it, encouraging it. Would that go down?
That would be good. And actually, it's very important that the group we're talking about, the organization, has a culture of tolerance. Because if the organization doesn't have a culture of tolerance, these diverse people will not going to be listened to or considered.
That's where the culture comes into play.
Exactly. The culture is very important. That's why I'm not sure if the military, as Armin was talking about, if a military organization could accept this neurodiverse, because over there it's yes sir, no sir. You follow orders. That's why the culture is very important. It's an underlying prerequisite for diversity to work.
I've always felt that some resistance to something that is diverse is a good thing, because instead of simply accepting a one-off wacky idea, if you push back on it, you make the person that came up with it refine it, argue for it, develop their communication skills around it, and improve it. And therefore, I'm not always supporting the idea that an organization should be completely open and accepting of everything. It has to have some ability to push back to get the idea developed.
The point is to discuss it.
Yeah.
Not to really cut it off at the moment you present the idea. Just consider. Yeah.
It's 1 minute past the hour and we're still talking. Sorry.
Okay.
We have to cut. As usual with Forum, no conclusions. All the conclusions are already in your head. The things that were popping up in your mind as we were going through. That's the takeaway. And so I'm going to thank all of you for joining this one on the Hivemind, for doing research beforehand, and for creating all these spin-off diverse ideas as we went through. And I think we may have an idea for a future forum. Thanks, everyone.